Okay, we looked at applying an extrude modifier to a spline. Now let's try looking at a lathe modifier. Okay, creates a radial geometry as opposed to extruded geometry. So in the front viewport, I'm just going to go to my Create tab, right, and then over to Splines, and let's just draw a star, okay? And make sure you draw it in the front viewport, and I'm going to put it, just so everything's consistent, I'm going to put it over on the right side of the home grid here, okay? It's on the right side. Not sure that's going to matter too much, but it might make things more the same for you guys. All right, so go to modifiers, and I'm going to look for lathe. All right, there it is. Now, lathe is kind of a weird modifier in that its initial presentation is always wrong, all right? It always lathes around its own axis, which is never good. You can't have self-intersecting geometry if you want it to render properly, okay? And so this is a star, right, what we're looking at right now here, rotating 360 degrees right on its own center. So if it was just 180, maybe that would be okay, but when it's 360, it runs back over itself. And so the way we want to normally use this, right, is we're going to have to move the axis, right, one way or the other. And there's some little shortcuts that work sometimes or sometimes not, depending on where you drew it and what viewport you're in and things like that. But if I hit min, okay, so that worked, right? I'm going to hit F4 in this viewport so I can see all my edges, increase the number of segments a little bit. All right, so this is a star being lathed around the axis, and min is the minimum, is the leftmost side. It's like pivoting around its own edge. All right. If I were to hit max, it worked in this case also. It went to the other side. Okay. And center is what it came up with. Sometimes these two buttons, are min and max, are not reliable. Sometimes if you hit it once and undo it, then it won't work again and stuff like that. But you can always adjust the axis manually. All right, so to look at that, up here in the word lathe, right, I'm clicking on axis, so I'm on axis. And if I get in the same viewport I drew it in, ideally, I mean, definitely, and I click, and I'm not going to drag up or down because that's not really going to make sense. But if I drag this way, it opens up, right? And if I go back to min, let's see, it did take me back. Okay, so make sure you don't move the axis in this viewport, because you can move it like see right here, it's getting spiraled like that. It's because I'm moving it back instead of parallel to the axis I drew it in. So, and you don't want to do that. So I'm going to open it up a little bit more here. So there's some space. So it's like a donut in the middle. Right? And let's look at some of the parameters. I'm going to get out of axis back to lathe, right? So I'm not in that sub-object type, and look at some of the parameters here, okay? So the number of degrees is 360, right? But I can change that to less. Like, let's say I'll make it 180. And there it is. There's half of the lathed object, 180 degrees, okay? If I were to do 90, it would give me a quarter, okay? I'm going to go back to 180. Number of segments, we already looked at that, okay? We definitely do want a cap on the start and end, but if you turn them off, okay, there it is without a cap. You're looking inside of it. And you can lathe it in different directions, and we will have to do this probably sometime during the semester. A lot of times it just does it, if you set it up correctly, it does it the right way. But I think we're on Y at the moment. Yeah, so there's Y. I'd have to go back to min. If I do X, it's lathing this way, and see min max doesn't work up or down. And there's Z where it's rotating around itself on the same plane as we drew the thing, which obviously doesn't work. So I'm going to do some Control Z's, see if that helps me any. Control Z is also kind of weird in 3ds Max, but I'm just going to go back to Y and min. I undid some stuff that I did it undid the things I was doing, but didn't change the axis. So there we are, back to the min thing and 180 degrees. So this output, you don't need to worry about that. That's just means that if you collapse the stack to an editable polygon, what kind of a object would it be? And the default of mesh is what you want. But this generate mapping coordinates, in the future, you might want that on. I would just leave that on. Generally, at the moment, it doesn't make any difference. Okay, so that's pretty simple. And then we can go down into the star area if we wanted to and adjust the number of points on the star. Okay. That seems to have screwed something up. What were we at, 6 originally? All right, so when something turns black in 3ds Max, that's generally because your normals are inside out, okay? And remember, it's like a 3ds Max object it's not a solid object, it's hollow like a balloon, and only the outside is renderable. And if it gets confused, sometimes it doesn't know which is the outside. And what happened here when I changed the number of points, there's self-intersection here, okay? So, and what I could do to fix that is just go back up to lathe, and I could try min again, and yeah, that fixed it, okay? Oh, one other thing, sometimes, particularly if you're making a shape like a cylinder or something, the core gets kind of like messed up looking like this, where there's a middle, sort of. So I'm just going to do weld core and see if that works. Yeah. And sometimes flip normal. If your normals get backwards and they're unified, you can just do flip normals, okay? And that'll make the normals go the opposite way. All right, so after this, we're going to go on to more complicated applications of lathe objects and make faces and lamps and stuff like that. But for now, let's just hand this thing in right here. So let's just, render setup. And, 800 by 600, 800 by 600, choose a place for it to go to, and, files, choose a place for it to render to. I'm just reviewing here. Choose JPEG, okay, save, and then render, right? And just render this thing out just to represent that you went through the tutorial. It's nothing particularly interesting, but it's at least we're all ending on the same place. And next we'll go on to kind of more complex and interesting applications of what we've just been looking at the basics of.